Good morning. I think it's funny to call this Lessons at Sunrise today. There is no sunrise. Kind of a post-apocalyptic looking sky, which I'm sure is true for all of you as well. I'm sure those fires are going to affect the sky for all of the United States. I can't imagine that they won't. It's incredible. So I decided rather than stand in my field today, I would sit at this beautiful little table and chairs. Morning, Carrie. That is set up, at the edge of my soybean field. So my soybeans are just on the other side. This is that little tree-lined path that I have been telling you about all these 2 weeks. So I thought I would share that with you today. I wanted to talk about a podcast I listened to yesterday, Brene Brown's podcast. One of the great things about having this 4-mile walk that I take 2 or 3 times a day is that I've listened to some really, really great podcasts. But this one was with a guy named Dr. Scott Sonnenschein. And he has a new book, which I don't even think is quite out yet. I think it's coming out next week, called Stretch. And the premise of the book is really this idea of, are you stretchy or chasey? And to be stretchy is to be creative and, morning, Ann, creative and problem solving and scrappy, and to look at situations and shift the lens so that you can bring your skill set, your talents to the table. It's the way that we are when we are living in constraint, however you want to define that. Good morning, Ren. And so I think about the years that I lived in income-based housing. Morning, Lynn. And I didn't have a lot of money, but I had this child who was highly creative and highly intelligent, and I was young and still curious about many, many things myself. So I was extremely stretchy in those years. I worked hard to make things seem like adventures. Like Quinn loved rocks. Loved them, would bring home rocks by the bucketful. And, when you live in an apartment, you just can only keep so many rocks. So I knew it was time for us to start moving some of those rocks along, but I knew how heartbroken he would be if we just chucked them outside. So we lived very close to the Cass County Courthouse downtown. And they had a whole rock section along the side of their building, which I named Rock Cemetery. And I would say to Quinn, morning, Peggy. I would say to Quinn numerous times throughout the year, Quinn, it's time to take some rocks to Rock Cemetery. And so he would go through and he would select the ones he thought he could bear to part with, and we would put them in a special bucket, and we would take them to Rock Cemetery, and we would have a little ceremony is too strong a word, but we did this little thing with it. And then every time we walked past Rock Cemetery, he could stop and visit his rocks. I think that's stretchy. It didn't require any money. It didn't require us to go anywhere specific. It was a tiny little ritual that we had. And we did lots of things like that because we had to. There just wasn't a lot of money for anything extra. So rocks, don't get me wrong, Quinn had plenty of toys and all of that. We weren't living in a tent. But rocks were a thing at our house. And dealing with rocks became a thing at our house. And that's just one example. But I was extremely stretchy. I was extremely creative with the little money that I had, because guess what? I had to be. There was no option to screw up financially because we were so on the margin all the time. So that's stretchy in a very specific example. You don't have to have been poor to be stretchy. You can be a scrappy startup. You know, you're developing some new thing in your garage. Guess what? You're a whole lot scrappier. You're a whole lot stretchier when you're working out of your garage than you are 10 years later when you've suddenly gone public and you've got stock options and you've got 100+ employees. And you move from stretchy often to Chasey. And Chasey is where you start looking around at other people, at other businesses, at other parents, at other women, fill in your other. You start looking around and saying, I don't quite have it as good as fill in the blank. We're not doing quite as well as fill in the blank. And you start chasing these other people's lives, dreams, social media profiles, businesses, marriages, parenting styles, whatever it is. And you stop pushing yourself because now you're just comparing yourself. And when you're comparing yourself, you're coming up short almost always. And there were tons and tons of parts of this conversation that I found incredibly interesting. But there's an actual scientific phenomenon around the phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side. It's a physics phenomenon. So if you are the person who's looking at your neighbor and saying, ugh, they have it so much better than I do, and you're using grass as an example. Now, let me think about our yard. We don't spray our yard. We don't water our yard because guess what? I'm not going to kill butterflies and bees. And there are human beings in our country who don't drink fresh, clean water. I'm not giving it to grass. I understand the water I don't put on my grass doesn't then go to Flint, Michigan. It's the principle of it. So I'm sticking with the principle. So our yard is kind of scrubby, for lack of a better phrase. Both of our neighbors have pretty beautiful yards. Good morning, David. The phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side, applies literally to us. But here's what's so interesting. You can have good grass, and your neighbor can have the exact same grass, exact same quality of goodness. But when you look over your yard to your neighbor's yard, the angle with which you look, the physics, whatever happens with the shape of your eye, I suppose, and the angle, and wow, let's not get me on a physics conversation. That's not going to take us anywhere good. The physics of looking at that grass means that you will see your neighbor's grass as being better than yours, even when it's exactly the same. So think about that for a minute. You have grass in your yard, which you take care of to whatever extent. You look at your neighbor's grass enviously, and you see better, greener grass. That is not just an empty expression to explain envy. There is literally a physical explanation through your optical, illusionary seeing of that grass. It looks greener. So, to me, what's so interesting about that is, let's take my marriage, just because apparently I only am ever going to talk about myself. We decided, and a lot of people know this, so I don't need to go on and on about it, but we decided to launch our whole very public reveal of Maz's alcoholism and our journey back to sobriety, in part, not entirely, but in part, because so many people were writing to me and saying things like, boy, your marriage seems really amazing. And it was always tinged with this I'm not sure what you did to earn that. I'm not sure why you get to have a great marriage. I'm not sure why you get to have a great kid. Weren't you pregnant and not married? Like, why isn't your kid a mess? Didn't you screw up royally? Yes, I suppose I did. If you want to live by the conventions of there is a prescribed order to how things happen, yes, I jumped the marriage order. Fine. At 22, that felt pretty catastrophic. At 47, ask me how much I care. Yeah, not at all. Good morning, Mass Mary. So we launched that because I think people thought the grass was a whole lot greener on our side than on theirs. And here's what's real. My grass is Wizard of Oz green. Most of the time. Today. If you and I were having this conversation, and if I had been honest with myself and with anyone else, 4 years ago, September 15th, 2016, I would have told you that my grass was not only weedy and scrubby and sparse, it was full of thistles and unwieldy. I couldn't manage it at all. It was just like an abandoned lot in so many ways, where my marriage is concerned. In other ways, my grass was great. But just in that instance. So we shared this darkness. Morning, Paul. We shared this darkness because I thought it was really valuable for people to understand that you can have both tremendous joy and tremendous hardship. You can have incredible trips to Europe and be fabulously lucky empty nesters and be gloriously in love with your mate. All these years later, you can have that, and you can have the battle wounds of having lived through some really, really hard stuff. And it's way too easy, good morning, Alex, to forget that for every light there's a dark, for every good there's probably a bad, for every positive there's a negative. The optical illusion of greener grass is just that. It's an illusion. So why don't you figure out how to be more stretchy? I think most people had a period in their lives where they were stretchy over something, whether it was going off to college and having to figure out how to live on your own, or being newly parented or newly married and having to figure that stuff out, or not having a lot of money, or being a young startup entrepreneur, or your first weeks in a job where you feel woefully ill-equipped, or whatever your moment is where you really had to have those conversations in your mind of, come on, you can do this, you know you can do this, take the first step, you don't know what you're doing, but fake it till you make it, whatever, all those phrases, all that stuff, that's when you were really learning and growing and discovering what you were made of. That's when life was exciting, even though it was hard. The Chasey's not that interesting. It's not getting you anywhere. It's not serving you. And most importantly, you're chasing something that's not even real. If all you know about me is big job, successful kid, fabulous marriage, lots of trips to Europe, cute little house, tall and thin, if that's what you know about me, then you might want to chase some of that. But I can promise you, you don't want to chase being married to an addict. You don't want to chase trying to manage how to keep your kid's life unbalanced from, or balanced in the midst of that unbalance. You don't want to chase the excuses you have to make up to explain why your spouse isn't with you or why he's acting so. You don't want to chase that. We're past that today. If Maz were here, he would say to me, today, because Maz never ever says, oh yeah, I'll never drink again. Maz says, today I don't drink. So we're past that today. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. So listen to the podcast. I'll attach it to the live stream. Figure out where you were stretchy. Think back to how what's the word? Like how sped up things seemed in that time because you were learning and absorbing and trying so many things. That's really a good place to go back to. And you don't have to go back to being poor or young or inexperienced. You can practice it in your everyday life, no matter how comfortable you are. You can practice being stretchy. So that's my lessons at sunrise, minus the sunrise today. I'm sorry there's nothing for me to show you to just breathe in, but this background is pretty beautiful. I kind of feel like I'm in a JCPenney's photo shoot. Remember those photo shoots from when we were little? And they would pull the screen down? Doesn't that kind of look like that's where I am? If that were the case, I probably would have showered before I came to have a picture taken. Have an excellent day. John and Carrie and Paul, thanks for commenting. There's only one of these left. And I'm not really intending to keep them going once I get home because life will step back in. But we'll see what I talk about tomorrow.